Hello, this is Danton here again, and we're going to start with our part 2 of our lecture on effective communication skills for professionals. And in today's lecture, we're going to be looking at two things: how to be more effective at listening, and also how to be better at using questions. So let's start with our listening skills. So listening is actually an area where most of us are lacking. It's really the communication skill that needs the most practice for most people. Most of us don't listen as well as we think during a conversation. What happens to most of us is when we're in a conversation with someone, rather than actually listening, we're often just waiting for our opportunity to speak. And if the other person just pauses for a moment, we're ready to jump in. So listening skills are something we need to develop and we need to work on. So before I talk about how you can become a more effective listener, let me talk about 3 types of listening. Listening actually comes in 3 different types. The first type of listening is called passive listening. Passive listening means that as someone speaks to you, you don't really show any reaction. You're just kind of standing there. There's not much happening. You're not reflecting that you're actually responding to what they're saying or reacting to what they're saying. That's called passive listening. The second type of listening is called acknowledgement listening. Now, with acknowledgement listening, what you do is give short verbal responses to what the other person says. So, for example, acknowledgement listening would sound something like this. Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know that. It's those kinds of responses that you're giving to the other person as they speak to you. The third type of listening is called active listening. And that's the one we really want to focus on. Active listening is the idea that whatever someone says something to you, you take the main point of what they've said or the core message of what they said and you repeat it back to them. You summarize it, rephrase it back to them so that you can confirm that you've actually understood what they've said. And so active listening often works by using expressions like these. What I hear you saying is, or let me make sure I've understood what you've said. Or what a lot of native speakers will do is just say, okay, so, or I see so, or in other words, and they'll summarize. So let me give you an example of what I mean. Imagine you were in a meeting and someone said to you the following sentence: we can't finish the project by next month because we don't have enough money and we don't have enough people. Now, in that one sentence, what is the core message? The core message is they can't finish by next month. So if you were using active listening, you would take that core message and you would repeat it back using one of these expressions. So for example, I see, so you can't finish next month. Repeat that back, and then you can respond or say what you're going to say. The idea of active listening is to show the other person that you've understood their core message before you actually respond to it. Now let me say a couple of other things about active listening that we should be careful about. Number 1 is, make sure you don't repeat the sentence word for word back to the other person. That's actually a little scary, right? Imagine the following situation. Oh, I see. So you can't finish the project by next month because you don't have enough money and you don't have enough people. You do not need to do that. Just the core message is all you need. So focus on that. And the thing about active listening is it's actually important for 3 reasons. There are really 3 good reasons to use it. Number 1, if you use active listening, it's actually much easier to remember what people tell you. Why? Because it goes in, it's fully processed, and it comes back out. Right? Because you fully process that message, it's a lot easier for you to remember what people say to you. Number 2, if you use active listening, you actually prove to the other person that you are in fact listening to them. They know it. Why? Because you were repeating back the main message of what they've said. The third reason that you should practice active listening is that you are forced to concentrate. If you're going to use active listening, you must concentrate on what the other person is saying to you. Why? Because you have to repeat it back to them. The second type of listening I mentioned, called acknowledgement listening earlier, which is just short, simple responses like, oh, really? Oh, okay. Oh, I see. In that type of listening, even though you say those things, it doesn't mean you're actually listening to that person. You can say that, but in your mind, you can be thinking something else, such as, what am I going to do this weekend? Should I see a movie? You could be thinking that while you're saying, oh, I see. Oh, really? So the idea of active listening is it's going to force you and make you concentrate on what the other person is saying. So you want to try to practice active listening in meetings, in discussions. Again, main points, understand what they are, repeat them back, and then respond. So we're going to move on to the next one, which is called signaling. Signaling is particularly used when you have a question during a meeting or when you'd like to make a suggestion. The idea of signaling is that instead of just suddenly throwing a question at the other person, you would signal to them that you are in fact going to ask them a question. So you would say something like, may I ask a question? Or I have a question about that. Or I have a question about your last point. Or I have a question about what you just said. The idea is you are signaling to that person that you are about to ask them a question rather than just suddenly saying a question to them. Another idea is when you make suggestions, same case. For example, if I may make a suggestion, or I would like to make a suggestion, or I have an idea. This is called signaling. You're just telling someone in advance what you're about to do. Are you about to ask a question, or are you about to make a suggestion? And this can be very helpful because it really helps make the communication process go smoothly rather than just questions being thrown around randomly. So it's a good idea to signal when you're going to ask a question or make a suggestion. The next one is questions in general, and especially for those of us who are working in a language that may not be our native language, it's very important that you get into the habit of asking questions to make sure you understand what has been said to you. The big mistake that a lot of us make when we speak a foreign language is that we tend to pretend like we understood everything and then just go on to the next topic. But this will cause multiple problems later. You cannot pretend like you've understood something if you in fact didn't, because that's going to cause you a lot of difficulty later. Even with me learning Korean, I speak Korean, but sometimes I have a habit when Koreans speak to me to just pretend like I understood what they told me when in fact I didn't. And I realized that that's a problem and I shouldn't do that. I should ask questions. So if something is not clear to me, I would ask, could you explain that one more time, right? Could you please explain that one more time? That's one. If maybe the information is complicated or maybe it's a little difficult for you to understand, just ask them to explain it again. Or maybe they speak fast. Sometimes you'll meet people like that. Native speakers of English have a tendency to do this. Have you ever met people who speak really fast like this? Don't you hate it when they do that? It's just really annoying when they speak fast. Don't you wish they would slow down? Why would they need to do that? Okay, that's just an example, but what I'm saying is that you don't need to, if someone is speaking too fast, don't be embarrassed or don't be ashamed to ask them to slow down so that it's much easier for you to understand what they're saying. So if there's a speed problem, just ask them, could you please speak more slowly? Or there might be a case where they used a word that you don't know the meaning of it, or you don't know exactly what the word is or how it's used. So just ask them, could you explain the meaning of whatever word they used that you didn't understand? I think for a lot of us, and I think I speak for myself too, we tend to want to pretend like we've understood, I think for two reasons. One is kind of our pride. We're a little bit afraid to admit or to show to the other person that we didn't understand, because they might think that maybe our English ability is not very good, or our ability in the other foreign language might not be very good. So we're a little worried about that, so we tend to pretend like we understand and just go on to the next thing. And I think the second reason we do this is we think it might be annoying or bothersome to the other person if we keep asking them questions such as, what does that word mean? Or could you explain that one more time? But when it comes to work, you can't afford to make a mistake. And so you really need to focus on understanding everything clearly. And you have every right to ask these questions. It doesn't matter if it bothers the other person. An effective communicator doesn't pretend to understand. An effective communicator is going to ask questions until they understand. And one more thing I want to say is that if you pretend like you understood and just go past whatever it is or go on to the next topic, you've actually missed a huge opportunity to learn. So for example, if you heard something that you couldn't understand and then you just go past it or just move on to the next thing, then you still don't understand that content. If a word you don't know was said and you just skip over it, you still don't know that word. So you've missed an opportunity to learn. You've missed an opportunity to improve your language skills. These questions will help you actually improve so you can better understand what people are telling you. You can learn new vocabulary and new words or whatever it might be. So again, get into the habit of asking questions. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be ashamed. This is all part of your learning process, and it's going to help you become a more effective communicator. So that is going to conclude what we've talked about for our second lecture. So we've discussed how to be more effective at listening. We want to use active listening, where we're going to take the main point or the core message and repeat it back whenever we are speaking with someone before we respond to what they say. We also want to signal. So if we have a question or a suggestion we'd like to make, we tell that person. Before we actually ask the question, we let them know, I have a question I'd like to ask you. And then finally, we want to be in the habit of asking questions that help us understand what's being said to us. Don't pretend. Don't just skip over something that's important just because it's difficult or because it's hard. Ask them to, if they could please explain it again or speak more slowly or define a word if you didn't know what it means. Okay? So that'll conclude our lesson for today. Now in our next lesson, we're going to look at some tips on how we can handle conflict and disagreement with others. So I'll see you in lecture 3. Bye.